accusing Courtney Love of murder. I do urge Courtney, however, to step up and explain her suspicious role in the mysterious circumstances surrounding Kurt Cobain's death.
The day that I was in Seattle and Kurt Cobain's body was found, I was on the phone immediately to the Seattle Police Department asking them to slow down just to look a little bit closer at what was going on. I wasn't convinced it was anything other than a suicide. I assumed it probably was a suicide. And I continued to feel it was probably a suicide for several months. But I knew something was wrong. If this was a simple suicide, there were too many lies being bannered about. There were too many phony stories being planted in the press. I was being sent on too many wild goose chases. There was just too many inconsistencies for this to have been just a simple suicide. And Courtney wasn't dealing with the things that she had actually hired me to deal with and to resolve. So I'm going to read a simple statement, then we'll open this up and feel free to ask questions. As a result of my 10-year investigation into the suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of Kurt Cobain, along with the additional evidence and information uncovered by Max Wallace and Ian Halperin, I'm here today to formally call for the Cobain case to be reopened. I would also ask Courtney Love and the Seattle authorities to provide the public with documentation that could easily put this whole matter to rest. If Cobain's death was a simple suicide, I see no legitimate reason why these requests should not only be granted, but should be welcomed by those who claim to be innocent of any wrongdoing. As a former sheriff's detective, I know that in most cases involving a suicide, the cause of death is easily proven through the proper police investigation combined with the autopsy and medical reports. I maintain that there is nothing in these documents that would prove Kurt Cobain's death was a suicide. I believe the authorities were set up to expect a suicide, as evidenced by careful reading of the police reports, so when they walked into that room, that's all they saw. If there is proof of suicide, show us your proof. If you can't prove that Kurt Cobain committed suicide, the authorities should do the right thing here. Change the official finding from suicide to undetermined so that credible law enforcement and forensic experts can determine the true cause of death. If Courtney Love is not willing to explain why she won't allow these documents to be released, one can only wonder, what is she trying to hide? Why not, Courtney? What would it hurt? How could this uncomplicated request do anything except help you move on with your life and your career? And a few simple questions for the Seattle Police Department. Why was the second note Courtney claims to have found at the house after Kurt's body was discovered not booked into evidence or even mentioned in the police reports? Do the police even have a copy of this so-called second note? Why did the police publicly suggest that Kurt had barricaded himself in the greenhouse with a stool when the police reports clearly proved that the door was not barricaded? Why was the note found in the greenhouse immediately labeled by the police as a suicide note when it says nothing about killing himself? Can you document any similar cases with that high of a heroin or morphine blood level where there's any evidence whatsoever that the person was not immediately incapacitated? Just show us one case. If not, how can you refer to this as a typical or textbook suicide with those heroin blood levels? The truth is, the Seattle medical examiner who declared Cobain's death a suicide just happened to be a friend of the woman who had the most to gain from her husband's death. I won't stand by and allow Cobain to be convicted of suicide simply because a friend of Courtney Love says so. As Max and Ian have concluded, it's time to get to the truth about the death of Kurt Cobain. Thank you.
First question, back here.
Yeah, my name is Carlos Fresneda. I work for Spanish newspaper called El Mundo. I want to ask you, have you received any kind of threats of words from messages from Courtney Love in this whole time?
Throughout the years, there's been ongoing threats. In fact, Courtney's own PI, Jack Palladino, once showed up in my backyard on a Sunday evening and invited me out for dinner. And it was very well timed because it was Sunday. I really didn't know what to do, but I thought, hey, I'm not hiding anything. So I went out with him for dinner, and I explained to him, look, we just want. He said he wanted to see a copy of the manuscript, and he said, what's your price? And I said, just an interview with Courtney Love, and he said that will never happen.
I'm Steve Bloom of High Times Magazine. I'm a bit of an expert on this subject. You guys might remember this cover story a little while back, High Times, Who Killed Kurt.
He was one of the first journalists to report on this story in
Actually
detail.
predated your book. We never did get credit from Nick Broomfield, and neither did we get credit in your book, it looks like, because I don't see any references to High Times, but be that as it may.
We do mention High Times in the in Love and
I
Death,
didn't see it in
and
the index, but I'll...
Hank Harrison's interview with you.
Okay, thank
It
you.
was a very good article, Steve.
Thank you very much. What I would say, by the way, since I am familiar with this case pretty well, in answer to the MTV reporter's question, what I've heard so far here that's new is information about Kurt's alleged girlfriend. That was new. That's news. The Rosemary Carroll tapes, those are news. The Leland Cobain interview seems extremely damning. So you guys have a lot to work with. Congratulations, you've dug up a lot.